At dawn hours of May 11, 1945. In the dense Burmese jungle, darkness lies heavy like a weight. Nothing moves except the wind grazing through the bamboo thickets and the enemy soldiers crawling silently through the undergrowth. You are standing guard on Outpost 8, a remote listening post manned by a single American soldier. His name is Private John Raymond McKinney, a quiet man from rural Georgia. 25 years old. A man who never asked for glory and never expected to earn anything. But tonight alone, exhausted, and half asleep, he will be forced into a fight that no one could have imagined. A fight against more than 200 Japanese soldiers, advancing in complete silence. A fight that will drag him from dream into nightmare, from obscurity into immortality. The jungle is thick with humidity. Sweat rolls down McKinney's neck. He wipes it with the back of his hand. His rifle rests across his lap. His ears strain for sounds he cannot see. Behind him, a small American encampment lies quiet, dozens of soldiers asleep under makeshift tents. They rely on McKinney to warn them of any threat. He is quite literally their first and last line of defense. But the enemy has chosen this night for a daring raid. Not dozens, not scores, but hundreds of seasoned Japanese infantry, known for their stealth, discipline, and willingness to die. They have studied the outpost. They know the guard rotation. They know the terrain. They know exactly where to strike. And they know that McKinney is alone. A twig snaps, barely audible but enough. McKinney straightens. The darkness feels different now, alive, charged, waiting. Another sound. A rustle in the bamboo. A muffled whisper, and then a flash of steel. A silhouette rising from the brush. The first Japanese attacker lunges forward, bayonet extended. The strike comes without warning. McKinney has no time to fire. He throws himself sideways, grabbing the rifle by the barrel. The bayonet slices into empty air. McKinney swings the rifle like a club, smashing it across the attacker's jaw. The man collapses, but the jungle erupts. From every direction, shouting, movement, rushing feet. The full weight of the Japanese assault crashes into Outpost. They rush in with bayonets, grenades, rifles. A tidal wave of bodies hurling themselves at the lone American standing between them and the sleeping camp beyond the jungle line. This is the moment everything changes. This is where the story truly begins. For the next 45 minutes, McKinney will fight alone, cut off, wounded, surrounded, while the jungle becomes a chaotic battlefield. He will fire until his rifle breaks. Fight with knives, fists, gun stocks, anything he can reach. He will drag himself through the dirt, bleeding, exhausted, refusing to fall. And when the sun finally rises over Burma, 100 enemy soldiers will lie dead around him. A single man. A forgotten outpost. A stand that defies imagination. This is the story of Private John R. McKinney. The forgotten soldier who held off an army alone. To understand why one exhausted soldier stood alone in the jungle that night, we must begin far from Burma in the quiet farmlands of Georgia. John Raymond McKinney was born on February 26, 1921, in a world that barely noticed. His family lived simply. Hard work. Long days. Little money. And even less noise. He grew up plowing fields, tending animals, and learning the rhythms of rural life. Neighbors remembered him as soft-spoken and respectful. A young man who preferred silence to argument, and effort to pride. He was not built like a hero. He never claimed to be one. But the land toughened him. Responsibility shaped him. Strength grew quietly in his hands and in his character. When the war in the Pacific spread, McKinney did not give speeches. He simply enlisted. Burma in 1945 was one of the most brutal, unforgiving battlegrounds of the entire war. Thick jungle. Steep ridges. Monsoons that turned trails into rivers. Heat that suffocated. Diseases that killed silently. This was the world of the 41st Infantry Division, fighting through a region the Allies desperately needed to control. Burma mattered for 3 reasons. 1. Japan used it to cut China off from Allied support. Without Burma, China, America's key anti-Japanese ally, would collapse. 2. The Lido Road, the only supply route into China, ran through this dense jungle. Its protection was vital. 3. The Japanese 33rd Army still clung to the region, refusing to retreat, using small units and night raids to bleed the Allies dry. By spring 1945, the war in Europe was ending. But in Burma, the fighting was still exacting, personal, and merciless. McKinney was part of the 130th Infantry Regiment, a unit hardened by months of jungle combat. Their mission was straightforward but unforgiving. Hold a fragile chain of outposts deep in the forest to protect the main American encampment. Each outpost was a listening station. Small, isolated, easy to overwhelm. If any one of them fell, the entire defensive perimeter risked collapsing. And Outpost 8, where McKinney stood guard, was the most exposed of them all. Outpost 8 guarded a narrow path used by Japanese scouting teams. If they broke through, a direct route into the American camp would open. A successful breach could cost hundreds of American lives in a surprise assault. 4 days, officers sensed something was wrong. Enemy movement in the forest. Tracks. Whispers. Sudden silence. A Japanese raiding force was gathering. And they would strike at night. What the Americans didn't yet know was that the Japanese had committed a full company, between 150 and 200 soldiers, to destroy the perimeter. Their objective was brutal in its simplicity. 1. Kill the listening post guard, quietly. 2. Rush into the camp under darkness. 3. Slaughter the sleeping Americans. 4. Retreat before sunrise. McKinney, assigned alone to the outpost, was never meant to survive the attack. He was expected to be the first to die. All he had was a standard-issue M1 rifle. A knife. A few grenades. His experience. And a sense of duty sharpened by months in the jungle. No one imagined that one man could stop what was coming. In the late hours of May 10th, the jungle seemed too quiet. McKinney sat at his post, adjusting his helmet, writing occasionally in a small notebook, listening carefully to the forest breathing around him. Behind him, the American camp had fallen into deep sleep. Men sprawled across their bedrolls, weapons leaned against tree stumps, boots left beside shelter halves. A single man, alone in the dark, separated them from death. The Japanese force moved silently. Bare feet wrapped in cloth. Faces blackened with dirt. Bayonets fixed, rifles slung. Grenades tucked into belts. Knives drawn for the first kill, the guard. 150 trained soldiers, operating with deadly discipline, crawling through the grass toward a man they believed would be confused, panicked, helpless. They had no idea who they were about to face. Because John McKinney was not simply a guard. He was a survivor of countless jungle attacks. A marksman. A man who never panicked under fire. A man who understood darkness, silence, and danger as few others did. The enemy believed they had the element of surprise. But McKinney had something far more powerful. His instinct. And when that first twig snapped in the darkness, he knew what was coming. The jungle at night is never truly still. It whispers, it hums, it breathes. But on the night of May 11, 1945, something changed. The forest did not whisper. It waited. A heavy, unnatural silence wrapped itself around Outpost 8, a silence so complete that even the insects seemed to hold their breath. To most men, it would have felt like calm. To a seasoned soldier like John McKinney, it felt like warning. He shifted his weight. Adjusted his grip on the M1 rifle. Listened, truly listened, to the dark. Somewhere in that wall of blackness, the enemy was moving. The enemy force advancing through the undergrowth was no ordinary unit. It was a hand-picked raiding company, trained for stealth, ambush, and sudden, lethal violence. Their mission was clear: strike the outpost and eliminate the guard. Rush the sleeping camp before anyone could react. Destroy everything. This was not a probing attack. It was not a test. It was a calculated attempt to break American lines in one decisive blow, forcing a retreat and slowing the Allied advance through Burma. The Japanese commander believed he had the advantages. Darkness, numbers, and surprise. He was certain the lone sentry at Outpost 8 would die quickly. A single silent kill before the real assault began. But the commander made a mistake. He assumed the man standing guard was ordinary. While McKinney strained to hear the approaching threat, the American camp behind him rested in deep, vulnerable sleep. Dozens of men, spread across canvas shelters and dirt beds, were wrapped in the fragile comfort of exhaustion. Ammunition belts loosened. Rifles resting out of reach. They trusted the system. They trusted the outposts. They trusted McKinney. None of them knew that within minutes, the safety of the entire company would depend on a single man's will to stand, fight, and survive. McKinney lifted his gaze. The tree line seemed darker than before, as though it had thickened with shadow. Something shifted, the kind of movement that's more sense than seen. A faint rustle. A whisper of cloth brushing against bamboo. Then, silence again. He felt the hair rise on his arms. Danger was close. Very close. He slowly checked his rifle. Felt the weight of the steel. Checked the rounds. 8 shots in the clip. More on his belt. And the knowledge that if the fight came to him, he would have only seconds to act. 150 Japanese soldiers, low to the ground, crept toward the outpost. Some held grenades in their hands. Others fixed bayonets, their blades cold and sharp in the moonless dark. Officers murmured last instructions in hushed, urgent tones. The plan was set. 5 men would kill the guard. The rest would flood the camp. Speed, silence, and precision. The first wave tightened their grips on their weapons. Breath slowed. Shoulders lowered. Muscles tensed. They were close enough now to see the faint outline of McKinney's head and shoulders against the dim glow of his small lantern. Close enough to strike. There is a moment in every soldier's life where instinct overrules everything else. Thought, fear, exhaustion, and doubt. For McKinney, that moment came as a faint crack, a twig snapping under a foot. He froze. His eyes narrowed. His grip on the rifle tightened. That sound did not belong to the forest. It belonged to men. Armed men. Moving with intent. Something vast was unfolding in the darkness. McKinney inhaled, steady and controlled. His heart slowed rather than sped. His focus sharpened. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. A shape emerged. Barely visible. A low-moving form blending with the ground. Then another. And another. McKinney adjusted his stance. Shifted silently to the right. Raised the rifle halfway. Still, he did not fire. He kept watching. Because something in the movement was wrong. This wasn't a lone scout. It wasn't a small patrol. This was a coordinated advance, too many bodies moving together, too quietly, too deliberately. The jungle itself seemed to tilt forward, as if holding its breath for what was about to happen. McKinney exhaled. Slow. Controlled. His world narrowed into a tunnel. Just him, the rifle, and the shapes closing in on his position. He could hear them now. The soft crunch of cloth on leaves. The faint metallic click of weapons. The murmurs of men moments before violence. And then, a figure broke from the darkness. Bayonet raised. Charging silently. Followed by 4 more. This was it. The start of the attack. The opening blow of a battle McKinney was never meant to survive. But survival was no longer the question. Defense was. Duty was. Instinct was. And the lives of every sleeping man behind him were. In the next instant, the outpost would explode into violence. The forgotten soldier was about to meet his fate with steel, fire, and determination. And history was about to remember his name. The first attacker lunged out of the darkness. A blur of motion. The glint of a bayonet arcing toward McKinney's chest. Instinct moved faster than thought. McKinney jerked his rifle upward, knocking the blade aside. The impact vibrated through the wood stock. Before the attacker could recover, McKinney swung the rifle like an axe, a single, brutal strike. The attacker fell. But the shadows behind him surged forward. This was no isolated skirmish. It was the beginning of a wave. Another Japanese soldier leaped from the brush. McKinney fired from the hip. A deafening blast in the dead night. The muzzle flash tore open the darkness. For a heartbeat, it illuminated the shapes around him. Dozens of soldiers closing in. He fired again. And again. The M1's 8-round clip emptied in seconds. The metallic ping of the ejecting clip echoed like a signal. A call to violence. And the jungle answered. They crashed into him. Hands grabbing at his uniform. Feet striking. Steel flashing. A bayonet cut across his shoulder. Another stabbed toward his ribs. A man leaped onto his back, trying to wrestle him down. McKinney swung the rifle violently, using it as a club. The wood cracked against bone. He smashed the butt into a jaw. Then into a temple. Then into another face. The crowd surged. Hands pulled at him from every side. Someone grabbed his rifle barrel. The weapon ripped from McKinney's hands and fell into the mud. He was surrounded. Unarmed. Bleeding. Outnumbered 20-1. But he was not finished. A Japanese soldier lunged with a knife. McKinney seized the man's wrist. Twisted. Heard the snap. Tore the knife free. And drove it into the attacker's chest. He turned instantly. Another man grabbed his shoulder from behind. McKinney slammed his elbow backwards, breaking the man's nose. Spun. Struck again. A third soldier swung a rifle stock into McKinney's ribs. Pain exploded through him. He staggered, but forced himself upright. The fourth attacker raised his weapon. McKinney struck first, plunging the knife under the man's arm. Bodies fell around him. But more replaced them. The attack was relentless. He dove for his M1 rifle on the ground. A boot slammed down on his hand, an enemy trying to stop him. McKinney pulled anyway. Pain tore through his fingers, but he ripped the rifle free. He rolled, brought it up, and fired point blank into the man's chest. Then he fired again. And again. 5 shots. 6. 7. Another ping, the clip gone. He reloaded by feel, his hands slick with sweat and blood. The Japanese raiding squads expected a silent kill. A quick dispatch of the guard. Then a coordinated rush into the sleeping American camp. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a battle of their own making. Because McKinney was not falling. He was growing fiercer. Every second they spent fighting him delayed their mission. Every delay gave the American camp time. And time was fatal to their plan. The Japanese commander pushed his men harder. McKinney barely had time to breathe. Someone grabbed him from behind. Another soldier charged from the front. He fired once. The front attacker fell. Then McKinney threw himself backward, slamming the men behind him into a tree. They rolled in the dirt. Fists. Elbows. Grapples. Grunts. The wet snap of bone. McKinney broke free, snatched up the fallen man's rifle, a Japanese Arisaka, and fired without aiming. The recoil smashed into his shoulder. Another shot. Another enemy dropped. He flung the empty rifle aside. Another wave poured forward. McKinney swung his M1 like a club once more. This time the wood stock shattered against a helmet. Splinters scattered across the ground. His primary weapon was now ruined. But he did not hesitate. He grabbed another Arisaka rifle off the ground, fired until the bolt jammed, then hurled it like a spear into the next attacker. Then he seized a Japanese submachine gun from the dirt. A Type 100. He pulled the trigger. The burst ripped through the night. A chattering roar of fire. Multiple attackers fell. The momentum of the attack pushed McKinney back toward the shallow trench behind the outpost. He slipped, fell to one knee, and fired upward as silhouettes loomed above. Grenades landed near him. He kicked one away. It exploded in the trees above. Another grenade rolled beside him. He grabbed it, threw it back. A scream followed. Enemy soldiers tried to leap down into the trench. He shot each one as they appeared, the muzzle flashes lighting their faces for a fraction of a second before they collapsed. There was no pause. No chance to breathe. No space to think. McKinney fought purely on instinct. Reload. Strike. Fire. Grab another weapon. Fire again. Duck. Roll. Stab. Strike. Move. Pull the trigger. Reload again. The night became a blur of sound and violence. Gunfire without rhythm. Men shouting in Japanese. The crack of bone. The hiss of grenades. The desperate breathing of a man refusing to die. At some point, McKinney never knew when, a bullet grazed his side. Another ripped across his shoulder. Blood soaked into his shirt. But he stayed on his feet. The Japanese commander ordered a final push. This was their last chance to break through before sunrise. They rushed him from both sides. 10. 15. 20 men at once. McKinney fired the Type 100 until it clicked empty. He tossed it. Grabbed another rifle. Fired. Another. Fired. Swung it like a bat. Kicked a man in the chest. Ram a bayonet into another. The ground around him turned into a circle of bodies. Tangled limbs. Rifles. Spent casings. Blood pooling in the dirt. Still, he did not fall back. He held the line alone. The enemies will began to break. Their coordinated charges faltered. Their voices turned from commands to confusion. Who was this man? Why wasn't he dead? Why wasn't he retreating? Why wasn't he afraid? Some attackers hesitated. Others pulled back. The momentum shattered. And as the last few soldiers rushed him, McKinney met them with the same unrelenting force. A rifle butt to the jaw. A knife thrust under the ribs. A shot at point-blank range. The last attacker stumbled forward. McKinney struck him down with the remains of his broken rifle stock. And then... silence. Complete silence. McKinney stood trembling, chest rising, and falling in ragged gasps. Smoke drifted through the still air. Spent bullets glinted in the dirt. Weapons lay scattered everywhere. And around him, in a wide, terrible circle, lay the bodies of more than 100 Japanese soldiers. He was alone. Alive. And the American camp behind him still slept. He had held the line. One man. One rifle. One impossible stand. When the first thin line of sunrise crept through the treetops, it revealed a scene almost impossible to comprehend. The jungle floor was torn apart. Smoke drifted like ghostly fog. Spent shells glittered across the dirt. Weapons lay abandoned, broken, twisted. And the bodies, so many bodies, lay scattered around Outpost 8, as if the earth itself had rejected them. In the center of it all stood a single man. Private John Raymond McKinney. Exhausted. Bleeding. Barely able to stand. But alive. He leaned against a shattered rifle stock, the sweat drying on his face, his uniform torn open at the shoulder. His breath came in sharp, painful pulls. Every muscle trembled. Yet he kept his eyes on the tree line. Even now, after killing more than 100 enemy soldiers, he refused to assume the battle was over. That was the kind of soldier he was. Shouting echoed from the camp behind him. Someone get the medics. Look at all this, my God. Who was out here? Who held this alone? Men rushed toward him, rifles raised, expecting the worst. They slowed as they neared the outpost. Their boots stepped carefully between bodies. Expressions changed from confusion, to shock, to awe. A sergeant reached McKinney first. Jesus, John, what happened out here? McKinney looked at him. His voice was quiet. Flat. Almost detached. They came, he said. I stopped them. Nothing more. Because nothing more was needed. Medics arrived and lowered McKinney onto a stretcher, though he resisted at first. He insisted on walking. They insisted harder. As they carried him away, soldiers counted the bodies. One by one. Carefully. Silently. The number grew. 20. 50. 70. 90. 100. Then over 100. Men who had survived dozens of firefights stood speechless. They could not imagine what McKinney had endured. Not hours. Not days. But 45 minutes of continuous hand-to-hand combat. Alone. Cut off. In the dark. It defied logic. It defied training. It defied everything they believed a single human being could withstand. In the medical tent, McKinney asked only one question. Is everyone else safe? When they told him the camp had not suffered even a single casualty, he nodded once and closed his eyes. For him, that was the victory. Not the bodies around the outpost. Not the number of attackers he had killed. Not the praise gathering around his name. Only that the men behind him had lived. The report moved quickly up the chain of command. Commanders visited the site. Investigators took measurements. They mapped every point of the fight, traced every bullet, marked every footprint and weapon. The conclusion was undeniable. Private John R. McKinney had single-handedly stopped a full-scale Japanese raid, saving his entire company. The United States Army awarded him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the nation. The citation recorded the scale of his actions. Enemies disarmed, shot, struck down with bayonets. Weapons taken from fallen attackers and used against the next wave. A lone outpost defended with impossible courage. But McKinney spoke little about it. He returned home. Married. Worked quietly. Lived the same way he had before the war. Modestly, simply, without seeking recognition. History is often loud. It remembers generals, battles, and victories. But some stories, the most extraordinary ones, are hidden behind modest lives, soft voices, and men who refuse to call themselves heroes. John McKinney never boasted. Never promoted himself. Never pushed his story into books or newspapers. And so, over time, the world forgot. His name faded from headlines. His story became a footnote. A line in a military archive. A tale told quietly among veterans and historians. But the truth remained. For 45 minutes in the Burmese jungle, one man stood alone against an entire company of enemy soldiers. And he did not break. McKinney died in 1997, surrounded by family. No crowds. No parades. Just the peace of a life lived without fanfare. But his legacy endures. Not in monuments or speeches, but in the knowledge that courage does not require an audience. Sometimes, the greatest acts of bravery occur in darkness, unseen by the world, witnessed only by the few who live because another refused to fall. On that night in May 1945, the Japanese force believed they were advancing toward easy victory. What they found instead was a man shaped by quiet strength. A farm boy from Georgia, who stood alone in the jungle and changed the fate of everyone sleeping behind him. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. But he gave everything. And in the end, his story is not just about war. It is about the human spirit. The refusal to surrender. The power of one determined soul. Private John Raymond McKinney. The forgotten soldier who held off 200 enemies alone. May history never forget him again.